Welcome to A Warm Embrace, where we believe in the transformative power of touching lives and embracing communities through the power of captivating stories. Sit back, relax, and immerse yourself in the warmth of the Warm Embrace podcast.
Hi, Guillermo.
Hi, John. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Today is Friday, and today actually happens to be International Women's Day, so it's a really big day across the world. And so it's one of these days that we really want to go ahead and celebrate the power, the force, the resilience of women. So I'm excited about today.
I have here a few questions that I think you are the most qualified person to answer these two, same last episode.
Again, I don't think I'm the most qualified, but I will do my very, very best to go ahead and answer these questions in as open and truthful a manner as possible.
I think the episode today is quite interesting for me personally. So the question number one is, why is embracing vulnerability and sharing our personal stories so important for personal growth and building connections with others?
Ooh, that's a multifaceted question, and that's a very good one. Let's go ahead and start. Let me go ahead and dissect it and start from the beginning. Why is embracing vulnerability important? The truth about embracing vulnerability important is that we are all vulnerable. And even though society places a big and a heavy importance on strength, the truth of the matter is that vulnerability also makes us who we are. We are the product of our traumas. We are the product of our insecurities. We are the product of our experience. Those experiences can't and are not fully positive throughout our lives. And it's in those moments of vulnerability that we grow. And so that's primarily why we need to go ahead and embrace them. And it's a rather oxymoron for us also think that vulnerability doesn't give us strength, but it very much does, because it's based on those moments of true weakness, if you will. But I don't necessarily like to use that word, but it is in those moments where we are our most vulnerable that we can grow, because we learn. And the reason for it being so important in our personal growth is because that's how we grow as a person, and we can grow as a society. And when we open up to those facts, when we open up to those stories, when we open up to those experiences, that actually allows us to truly connect on a deeper and personal level, one-on-one, not only one with ourselves, also with our creator, but also with each other. And just the one secret to that is that we can't dwell on our vulnerabilities. I think we can go ahead and experience them. Once we experience them, we can go back on reflecting on them, but we shouldn't dwell on them. We can learn from them. We can embrace them for certain. I mean, we can go ahead and really accept the fact that we are a certain type of person. That, for example, if we also need to take into consideration, rather, is that one person's vulnerability, one person's weakness can also be their strength. And for another person, their weakness and their strength can be that first person's weakness and or strength. So we need to take into consideration that we are all people of various and a myriad of emotions, that we need to go ahead and accept that we're not all going to be the same. And any item or any vulnerability, since we're using that word in this podcast, is not truly a weakness. Rather, it can be a calling card that we should very much accept and learn to work with, and not feel burdened by.
How can opening up about our struggles and challenges create a supportive and empathic community that fosters emotional healing and resilience?
Well, the word is in the question. It's empathy, and empathy really is one of those superpowers that we all have. But it's not often used. And the truth of the matter is that empathy is when I can go ahead and relate to another because I've experienced something very similar. It's rather different from sympathy, because sympathy is I can go ahead and feel emotion for another, but I may not necessarily know what he or she is going through. But empathy will allow me to know what they're going through, despite the fact that I may not necessarily have experienced the exact same thing. But the truth of the matter is that we all experience traumas, as I said, and when we experience those traumas, we know how we felt, and therefore we know what somebody else is feeling. I mean, we've all experienced a loss, and that loss is an inevitable part of life. And it's just one of those situations that we need to go ahead and really tap into and touch upon when we are interacting with others, because that empathy, that feeling, that understanding, that connection is what actually makes the true communication and that human connection real. When you can go ahead and open up to me and say, you know what, Guillermo, I've experienced this, or I'm going through this, more than likely, I would have already gone through something similar. I would have already experienced something similar, and I will know what you're going through, and I can only give you the tools that worked for me. And in that fashion, we can go ahead and grow both. We can both grow, not only at my being able to give you that comfort and be that sounding board, but you will also be able to see, okay, wow, I know that this is not the end. And that's really one of the most important things, because when we go through loss, when we experience a letdown, when we experience a lull, when we experience a bottoming out, our minds tend to think the worst. They tend to tell us this is the end, this is it, we're done for, when in reality it is not. And when we can go ahead and connect with somebody else who's gone through it, who's experienced something equally egregious or maybe even more so, the truth of the matter is that if we're able to see them as survivors, and we're able to see them as being able to overcome, if we've been able to see them as landlords of their life, if you will, where they've been able to overcome that trauma, where they've been able to overcome that negative tenant in their life, and they've evicted it, then we as a people can go ahead and do the same. We can go ahead and say, you know what, I'm experiencing this. I'm learning from it, and I'm coming out all the better and stronger on the other side because of it.
For those who find it difficult to share their vulnerabilities openly, what are some alternative ways they can still find strength and support in their journey?
Listening to other people's stories. Definitely listening to other people's stories. And that's really, that's why it's so important to go ahead and be able to share. Not everybody is ready at any given moment to be able to share what it is that they're experiencing at any given moment. The truth of the matter is that we all experience situations differently. We all experience situations in a very personal way. And so if a person may not necessarily be ready to share that story, that's because they're still reliving, or they're still very much living the trauma. And as a result, they can't necessarily be able to speak openly about it. And so one alternative to that is to listen to other people's stories. I heard it once, and I believe is from a very well-known speaker, and by all accounts, one of my mentors, Tony Robbins, and he did say, we've all experienced the same thing, or we've all experienced a version of the same thing. And no one trauma is unique. No one trauma is unique to each individual, because we've all experienced some version of it. And someone else has already overcome it. Your trauma, it's not specific to you in the fact that it's not original. Trauma has existed since the beginning of time. And even think of the time of Adam and Eve. There was trauma there. And the truth of the matter is that the secret to being able to go ahead and overcome that trauma is to be able to go ahead and really learn from it. And if you're unable to speak about it, then listening to others who have overcome it, who are currently on the other side of that trauma that you're experiencing it, and are able to put words to paper, or put words to mouth, or put words to a story that actually opens up about that trauma and how they've been able to overcome it. That is actually a healing mechanism as well.
In a world that often celebrates strength and resilience in silence, how can we shift the narrative to encourage and value vulnerability as courageous act that brings us closer together?
I was one of those people that I was a stoic silent, and it was as a result of a childhood experience. I'll tell you a story about that. When I was, I believe, in the third grade, I was recounting a story, and it was a story of my family. So I was born in El Salvador. My parents and my sister are also from El Salvador. So our family was born in El Salvador. But my parents immigrated to the United States at the time of the Salvadorian Civil War, which is in the early 80s. And my parents had shared their stories, the experiences, the threats that they had received, because both my mother and my father had positions in the Salvadorian government. And my grandfather happened to have been mayor of San Salvador prior to my birth, so there was some level of political connection in my mother's family. And so, coming to the United States, of course, I was an infant when I first arrived to the United States. But then when I was in school, I was just relaying a story, and I was told by a childhood peer, another child in the third grade, "Oh, who cares about that?" And that actually struck a chord with me. That actually it stayed with me for years, with the thought that nobody cares about your story aside from you. And that was something that I actually lived with for years, for decades of my life. And then until I realized that one experience is not the experience that everybody holds. That's not the thought process that everybody holds. And I was actually holding on to those words, to the words of a 7-year-old, of a 6-7-year-old that were told to me. And I was living with that for years on end, until I finally realized, no, our stories are very important. Our stories are truly healing mechanisms, not only for ourselves, but by and large for the world. And so that was something that it took me years to really experience. And so, because as somebody who has been a silent stoic, somebody who has valued silence, somebody who has valued keeping your stories to yourself, I know what this question means because I lived it. But then eventually it came to a point where I needed to heal. And one of the first things that I healed was really thinking that, no, I needed to go back and speak to my 6-year-old self. I needed to go back and say, you know what, Guillermo, your story does matter. Your experiences do matter. Your experiences are cared for. And just because that one child back in the 80s didn't care, because how could he know better, right? I mean, he was a 7-year-old. And sometimes we think, oh, wow, as adults, we look at children and we realize that, no, they don't know any better. We act, or we used to act based on impulse. We used to act based on the day that we were having, and that's a beautiful thing for children. But when you think when as a child you're on the receiving end of words like that, then you carry them with you. You internalize them until you're able to break free from that negative story, from that thought that, you know what, people do care. And that's what I've been able, that plays a large part to my message, to the fact that I do care, to the fact that I am a warm embrace to the world, to the fact that I am an advocate for stories, and the fact that I want to hear your story. I want to be there. I want to be there and be able to comfort you when you need me to comfort you. But at the same time, I want to be there to cheer you on when cheering you on is what is most warranted. I mean, I want to celebrate your wins, but I also want to be that shoulder for you to cry on in your losses. And that healing for me has prompted the message that I'm trying to send out. And so that question was very personal. So thank you for that, because it allowed me to share something about myself in terms of what healing I've done. And I know that there are several millions of people out there who keep stories bottled up, who keep their experiences inward and inside because they think that nobody cares, or because they think that nobody will understand, or because they think people will judge them. And the truth of the matter is that those stories are healing. And once we're able to go ahead and really touch upon those stories, then we become better. And as a result, society as a whole does too.
Thank you so much for that, Guillermo. It's quite powerful, and I think I learned a lot of a lot of things from that.
Thank you, John.
And also, it really helps our audience to know more about you too. So thank you so much for sharing your vulnerabilities to us.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
And for those who find it difficult to share their vulnerabilities openly, what are some alternative ways they can still find strength and support in their journey?
Well, again, that goes back to the stories. That goes back to listening to the stories of the people that have been able to overcome their own traumas. But we also, one of the other items that I think is that we should also feel free to go ahead and rely on our friends and family. And I know that may be a double-edged sword, because sometimes some of those stories, some of those traumas have been inflicted in the home, or we feel that you can't speak to somebody who knows so much about you, or who may be involved in that story, or who could have been part and parcel to the life that you were suffering from, or that somebody's suffering from. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes talking to a stranger is in fact better. And that's the reason behind the whole concept of the Guillermo.world environment, or the ecosystem that I want to go ahead and create, is because my mission is to create an ecosystem or an environment where we're all witnesses to each other's lives. And so I may be currently a witness to a handful of people's lives because they're in my social circle, they're in my familial circle, they're in my geographic circle. But the truth of the matter is that the premise for Guillermo.world is I want to be a witness to the lives of the world. And so sometimes people may find it easier to speak to somebody that they don't know, to open up to somebody that they don't know, because it eases the fear of judgment. It eases the fear of rejection. It eases the fear of lamentations. And the truth and that in and of itself is such a wonderful gift. I mean, think of the idea of therapy. I, for one, I was at one point in my life an opponent of therapy, because it's like, I, as a man, why would I need to go ahead and speak to somebody to fix something that I can fix? Why do I need to go ahead and open up about my feelings? Why do I need to go ahead and share something? Again, it goes back to that childhood story that nobody cares about. And And it's fitting that we're having this conversation on International Women's Day because of the fact that you and I as men and our cultures, we are taught that men don't share. We're taught that men don't feel, and if we do feel, we don't talk about it. We keep it in. And one of the things that we've learned from the women warriors in our lives and the people and these women that support us is the fact that they have an easier way or an easier means of being able to create an environment for themselves in which they can share, in which they can go ahead and feel, in which they can go ahead and comfort each other. That's one of the things that I've always admired about women, is that they can go ahead and create an environment for themselves in which they can go ahead and feel safe. That's not saying that it's for everyone. That's not saying that it happens in every single corner of the earth, but in my opinion, it is easier within that gender. But that's something that I want to go ahead and be able to bring in universally. I wanted to go ahead and cross gender barriers, because at the end of the day, even us men need to be able to share, need to be able to find comfort in another. And whether it be a stranger, whether it be a distant acquaintance, whether it be a therapist, whether it be a life coach, whether it be me, somebody in my ecosystem, somebody in this ecosystem, that's what I would want. And it's funny because I want to bring in another story, is that I was actually in an event, and prior to going into that event, my wife and I were both guests at the event, and there was another couple. And at this particular event, it was a Tony Robbins event. That event gives you the opportunity of being able to share. And naturally, when you're in a new environment, or when you're in an environment with several people, you tend to latch on to the person that you know better, right? So because that's what gives you comfort. It's like, who gives me the most comfort? Of course, my wife. So I'm going to be there. But it was interesting because I was already inside the venue, but my wife happened to be walking in, and she happened to be walking in with this other woman, and they were sharing their experiences, as women tend to do. And they were saying, my wife asked, "Oh, how is the event going for you?" She goes, "You know what? It's not as powerful as I was hoping it to be." And my wife is taken aback. "Oh, why is that?" She goes, "Well, I'm here with my husband, and when we're sharing, since we know each other so well, we tend to become defensive. And because the idea behind this is to be able to go ahead and open up. And so that was interesting. So my wife came up with this rather ingenious idea. So she said, why don't you and your husband sit with Guillermo and I?" And so they sat next to each other, and she said, "And the reason, because then that way, when it's time to share, you and I will just share, and then we'll leave the two men to share." And she said, she goes, "Oh, really?" And she goes, "Yes. And don't you worry, because Guillermo has this natural way of being able to talk to people. So that he's not gonna make it awkward. And the fact that if I decide to share with you, he's gonna go ahead and get upset because he and I are sharing." And that's exactly what happened. And it was so interesting because when it came down, or it came time to our one-on-ones, I started talking to this gentleman. And of course, we first started talking about innocuous items, but then naturally we start getting into the deeper subject matter. And we both had more to say than had we been speaking to our wives. And it was a very interesting, again, it was a very eye-opening experience for both of us. I mean, when you're not competing with somebody, and that's not to say that you in a marriage are competing with somebody. So that's what I wanted to clear up. But when you're speaking to somebody and there's no competition, there is no familiarity, there is no need for judgment, then it becomes all that much more and all that much easier for a conversation to occur, for an honest conversation to occur, because then that means, you know what, I can go ahead and open up. And I think that there's something about the anonymity of it all that allows for it, because if this person is not in your social circle, if this person is not in your routine and daily life, then what need do they have for your secrets, if you will, for your experiences, for your stories? They're just there to listen, and they're opening up to you, and you're opening up to them, is for mutual healing. And so that's really the whole concept of being able to heal, especially in times of a person wanting to be closed. So if they feel that they're unable to share their story, and most often you think that you're unable to share your story with the people that you know, with the people that you love, with the people that love you, with the people that are surrounding you. So if you are able to go ahead and find maybe a third party, if you're able to find somebody who's willing to listen, if you're willing and your means allow for being able to find a life coach or a therapist to be able to talk to, I highly recommend it, because again, your story does matter. And by at one point giving that story a voice, will go ahead and open you up for so much healing.
Thank you so much for that, Guillermo. I think the next question is also related to that story that you have at Tony Robbins activity. How did you strike a balance between sharing personal experience and protecting your boundaries in a public or online setting?
That, and yes, and you're right, that does go along with that. And the idea is, I think that in my particular case, it could be a little bit differently, because I'm actively engaged in a public platform. I'm actively engaged in public domain. So even in this conversation that will eventually make it to our podcast channel and will be placed on the internet, will live on forever. And the truth of the matter is that I'm accepting of that. And I can't necessarily expect that for everyone, because not everybody has that calling. Not everybody has that mission. Not everybody has that dream. Not everybody has that want. So my experience is going to be much different from somebody else's. But the way that I look at it is that the moment that I realized that my story was important, the moment that I realized that everybody's story is important, the moment that I realized that we should all be witnesses to each other's lives, the only way that I could go ahead and truly bring that message home is if I lived my own message. And that's where it comes from. So I know I need to go ahead and be open. I know I need to be able to go ahead and give my story. I know I need to give my stories a voice, and I need to be able to make them public, because at the end of the day, it would be a huge contradiction if I expounded the speaking of stories and I refused to do mine, because then how could I live that message, or how can I promote a message that I'm unwilling to live myself? So in that particular case, to your question, is my balance is very different than somebody else's, and I need to go ahead and respect somebody else's balance. And in speaking about my balances, I'm speaking of my stories. I'm giving of myself in order to be able to relay a message, in order to be able to further a mission. And it's a mission that's personal to me. It's a mission that is truly important to me. And with that is truly the sharing of stories like the ones that I've shared herein.
For the last question, what role do you think empathy plays in creating a safe and supportive environment for people to open up and share their vulnerabilities or weakness?
Empathy is key. Empathy is key, and the truth of the matter is, I go back to your first or second question. The truth of the matter is that empathy gives us the opportunity to connect. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us a part of this human race and what makes us brothers and sisters in this life that we lead. It's like, John, you and I met months ago, and we have a connection because of the fact that we've been able to open up, we've been able to talk, we've been able to share stories,
Yes.
and I've been able, and I've felt comfortable sharing my story or my stories with you, because at the end of the day, that not only was healing for me, but it was in hopes that I could also provide some healing to you. That's not necessarily, and I'm not saying that you needed it, but as human beings, we all need some level of healing. And the only
I
way
need it. I need it, Guillermo.
we all need
Sorry
it.
for interrupting you.
No, not at all. We all need it, and that's true. And the truth of the matter is that empathy is the core of it. And that and empathy is the heart. And it's like, why when I speak about being heart forward, it's being empathetic. It's being able to be in a conversation and in a space where I can go ahead and offer my warmth, my love, my heart, because I've experienced something similar, because I can relate, I can empathize. And with that, that's the truly most important point, and where the connection begins. Because if we can't begin to place ourselves in the shoes of another, then there's never going to be a connection. And that's the thing. We need to be able to go ahead and really understand where another has been, and we start with ourselves, because who knows us better than ourselves, right? And so when somebody's giving us their story and when somebody's talking about that, we invariably and inevitably find a way to connect, because we've experienced something similar. I mean, sometimes I'll be further honest. I mean, there were moments in my life where I thought, I was like, oh, I wished I never had to go ahead and feel something negative. Or my situation was like, I pay attention to the stories of others because I don't want to experience pain. And that was something that I thought I had broken the system, if you will. I thought that I had hacked the system. I said, it's like, oh, I'm going to listen to the stories of others so that I don't follow in their negative footsteps, or that, and by negative footsteps means I don't experience their pain. I can go ahead and learn from their lessons. I can go ahead and learn from their mistakes. That was my thought process. That's what I really thought. And that's how I said, you know what, that's my life hack. Until I experienced my own downfalls, until I experienced my own setbacks. And here I was being focused on the stories of others, and I didn't realize that I had stepped over my own tripwire. And that was what was really eye-opening in that regard. It gave me the idea. It's like, no, Guillermo, you didn't hack that life. That life hack doesn't work. Because the truth of the matter is that we are required to go ahead and experience those setbacks, because that's how we can learn, and that allows us to be able to empathize with our fellow man and woman.
Wow, this episode is quite jam-packed. I learned a lot of things.
I agree.
That concludes our today's episode of A Warm Embrace. Do you have anything to say to our audience right now?
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate this episode, because I very much agree. It was jam-packed, and it really allowed for a further connection between you and me, and between our listeners and myself, and with our mission. And to all of you listening, thank you. I mean, at the end of the day, this platform wouldn't be able to exist without each and every one of you. And I appreciate you all. If you want to learn more about me, if you want to connect with me, feel free to join our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on all the different channels and platforms, and we welcome you all. So thank you very much. And if I ever see you or you see me on the street, feel free to give me an open arms and I will go into the hug.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us by liking and subscribing to our channel. Your small gesture means the world to us and helps us continue creating more content like this. See you in the next video.